Once again, this is global webinar number 4. We're doing this on behalf of Futureproofing Next. We like to lay claim to the fact that we take innovation to the bank, and certainly one big part of that is mining the experts of the world at large for their expert opinions. We're doing that on this webinar today, but the actual webinar itself, called the Corporate Innovation Playbook, really is a group of very enlightened individuals around the world trying to figure out how do we do corporate innovation better. So I'm joined by my always wonderful and intellectual host, Andrea Cates. Just say hi, just to make sure you're there and have a pulse, Andrea.
I think I'd rather be wonderful than intellectual this morning.
Oh.
So yeah, maybe I'll be both, but yes, good morning and very excited. We have a growing community and we are learning a lot from the community, and excited to have the guests today talk about the Corporate Innovation Playbook.
So I'm going to pause on introducing all of our guests. We're going to do this in almost 3 parts, and then hopefully have everybody collide together at the end. But we're being joined by Toronto and Calgary, and I believe Detroit, Jaime, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. Okay. So why don't we get started? Because there is a lot to go through here. In terms of just teeing this up, this is not wishful thinking. We actually have gone out and tried to find pragmatic individuals giving their opinions on things. This is not about crazy loon shots. This is about everyday, how do we lead and manage innovation? This is not about innovation purism. There's certain people that, like to preach from one different pulpit or another. We were truly on a journey of trying to learn. We're certainly not academia. I know we guest lecture a few times, Andrea, but we're certainly not approaching this as an academic study, but more as a pragmatic study. How do the best put on their pants in the morning when they do innovation? And it's not one person's opinion. Certainly, we've interviewed about 30 different executives around the world, and we have a quantitative study that we'll share the results from as well. And certainly, we've kept the study open as well. So if anybody still wants to get in and have a couple of different benefits, including getting a free preview of a report, here it is, Corporate Innovation Playbook. So, as mentioned, myself and Andrea sat back a while ago with 10 other people and pulled together the 50 questions that we always wanted to answer. And hopefully we'll answer one of them today. I'm not too sure if we can pop up the results on our advanced poll question. I'm going to pause and do my Sammy Davis stance here. Granted, we probably had some early bloomers that come in, so I don't know if we can take quantitatively this to the bank, but innovation is a growth-driven mindset and culture. Unanimous. We are all unanimous in that mindset. So it is a slam dunk. Andrea, any thoughts?
Well, I love the fact that over the years since first when you started doing this kind of survey, people were much more interested in theoretical. And in those days also, academic meant something that was from a textbook. And the connection between the textbook and in the wild was not very clear at that moment. And so I think it's fascinating that over the past 3 years even, we've seen a change from innovation as an activity to innovation with expected results that are directly connected to growth, and I think connecting with that strategy for a company. So to me, that's really great news, because it means we have a responsibility as innovators to not just have fun activities or innovation theater, but to actually have impact and thoughts around the strategy. So I think it's great. It sounds like we have a wonderful group of people again.
Awesome. Well, they'll certainly enjoy our results, because this is definitely a focus on how do we drive business through innovative growth, and we'll learn hopefully something today in our webinar. Sometimes when I lock that down, here we go. So as I mentioned, we've built an entire enterprise, Futureproofing Next, around trying to validate and explore and how do we deliver better futures and better innovative futures with business impact. I know Andrea always likes to say, really what our business is about, and certainly the study is about, is innovation in the wild. So cheesy grass in front of slide share, notwithstanding. And as mentioned, we do have 3 wonderful guests that have different slivers on this whole innovation question day. I'll introduce them briefly now, and we'll introduce them more formally later. Jaime Foucher from Ford, who runs an emerging innovation department there, and I'm very curious to know how Ford does this work. Hi, Jaime. Everybody mutes.
Everybody has to unmute, exactly.
We're muted. Hello. Happy to
Really
be
good to have you
here.
on board.
Yeah, looking forward to a good conversation today.
Paul Barter, hailing in from Toronto as well, managing partner of Paul Barter and Associates. And Paul is one of the leaders in understanding how technology changes how we innovate, how we do business models. So, hey, Paul, good to have you on board.
Good morning.
Good morning. And then Sharon McIntyre from Calgary. She is the co-founder of New Cottage Industries, but she has a vast and wondrous pedigree of experience and business cards to her name. She has worked in so many different countries with so many different institutions that are trying to mint this question around innovation. So, hey, Sharon.
Good morning, Sean. Good to talk to you.
It's the Calgary early morning voice, yes.
Hey, Andrew's even earlier, so I have no excuses. I have my coffee with me, though, so there you go.
Excellent. All right. We've also got some people in the background. Certainly, if you see anything you like, use our Futureproofing next hashtag. You can certainly get in touch with us, and there are ways to get involved with us on a more embedded basis, either in finding, in doing the study, or doing the network, or joining our network. And we've already had our results. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're ambitious. We're going to try to cover all 10 of these things over the next 40 minutes, and then certainly open it up for Q&A for any of our attendees that have come in. Yeah, I think Jaime and Andrew will be handling the top 4 questions that are really, how do corporations go to work in the trenches on this, and why do we even need it? I think we're probably going to peel the layer of the onion on that question. I know myself and Paul are going to cover off technologies, business models, and how this all compares to startups. And then myself and Sharon will be tackling just contributors and barriers, and how do we build an innovation culture, and how do we commercialize it? And then hopefully all of us will get into the prediction business and try to figure out what the future looks like. So I'm going to hand this over to Andrew now, and hopefully, Andrew, you can introduce your guest and take it away for the next 10 minutes.
I would love to. So let me welcome to the group Jaime Foucher. And I'll read this because I think it's really important that as part of Ford's Emerging Technology and Innovation Organization, Jaime Foucher leads an innovation enablement team. Jaime bridges the gap between technical expertise and customer priorities, applying over 20 years of experience in corporate information systems, learning technology, and a passion for game design. As a pioneer in code creation, which we're going to talk about today, and I've been really lucky to work with Jaime on really pioneering this notion of code creation as a new emerging discipline within innovation, Jaime has applied new techniques for integrating emerging trends, which we will be all talking about today. What's on the horizon, what are the early signs of things that are to come, unstated customer opportunities, and I think that she has an amazing background in being able to see dead people, like in the movie The Sixth Sense, be able to discern customer truths from very innovative techniques, and also cross-industry insights, because she's looking at product development in the mobility space, and mobility has so many uncertainties that it's hard to use traditional means to figure out what to do next. What I love about this is, Jaime, let's talk about this. Why is innovation so important within the context at Ford?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical right now. And just to officially state, these are my opinions. So I'm just sharing with you what I think. I'm not the official Ford spokesperson on this, but we're at such an interesting point in time with our company, because we're still an automotive company. And there's interesting things happening there, right? There are disruptors to automotive that were not there 3 to 5 years ago. Companies who are not auto companies, but are building vehicles and are actually disrupting. That sort of thing is happening on the automotive side. So the trends and technologies and the need to stay, competitive and have a competitive advantage on the automotive side is still there. And that need, isn't going away, but we're also now in this mobility space. So we are an auto and mobility company, and our future is looking at being a part of helping people get where they need to go, even if that means not owning or leasing the vehicle. And what does that look like? How do we're trying to be a part of things like smart cities and mega cities, where there's all kinds of ways of moving from place to place, and technology is going to be a huge piece of that. And so I think I think what's interesting for us is it feels like as an innovator, as someone who's helping to drive this internally, there's this very dual kind of thing happening where the way that you innovate in automotive because of, you know, the legal restrictions and all those kind of constraints that are there are very different from the way we behave and the way we need to act to get successful in mobility, where we're doing more with transformational new revenue generating opportunities. It's like you're working in completely two different ways depending on the context. You have to completely shift gears, a whole different set of requirements, a whole different set of bureaucracy and all of that kind of thing. So it's very interesting internally and externally right now in automotive for sure.
Well, to stay on this point for just one more follow-up, imagining that it's 5 years ago at Ford, and now imagine today, and you open a door and there's people, quote, doing innovation, right? So 5 years ago versus today, you know, what's different today when you open the door? What does it look like so we can all get a sense of this in the wild?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is that it's not that we weren't talking about innovation 5 years ago, but it felt like it was more a thing you did now and then when someone ran an innovation challenge or there was something significant, unless you were in strategy or you were working in the R&D area, someplace where that was a core part of your job. What I see has shifted. What's very different for us now is innovation is important to everybody in the company. This is becoming a part of our culture. There are major culture shifts that are occurring now, and that quite frankly must occur or we aren't going to make it, right? We aren't going to be able to do what we have set for ourselves to do in terms of mobility. And so you see prevalent people behaving in very different ways, people questioning things that we've done, you know, in a company like Ford for decades upon decades, and questioning, is that the right thing? Are there new ways to do it? You see people collaborating, sticky notes everywhere, you know, I mean, that kind of thing, whereas 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been the norm. There would have been smaller groups of people who were already working that way, who already got human-centered design or were already doing things with new business models, but it was small pockets. Now that is becoming more common language across the company.
Well, let's move on to the next slide. And it's this notion of, you know, first of all, we've asked questions in terms of the Corporate Innovation Playbook around what people's key objectives are. And we're also starting to see shifts there that are parallel to what we said in the beginning, that it's much more strategic and it's much more connecting to business results. And I think it's amazing that the growth-driven mindset and culture is pretty much universally interesting to people this morning. So let's move to the next slide and we'll talk about distinctive approaches that work. And once again, I wish we had 2 hours just to talk with you, Jaime, because I know that you've been leading so many different efforts. One of the things I say about you when you're not around is that you're able to see gaps. So yes, you know that there's different approaches, you know, the lean startup, the design thinking, the agile, different, and we had a big debate about this last month. So you've seen it all, done it all, and yet you also notice what I call the white spaces. So tell us a little bit about that. What you saw was missing, you know, kind of what's de rigueur, like everybody has to do it, but then what did you see was the gap, and then what did you know absolutely you had to do to fill that gap?
Yeah, I mean, when we are playing in all those spaces, as you mentioned, we certainly are leveraging all of those schools of thought. We're doing human-centered design. We've got lean startup happening, especially in that mobility space. You know, you will hear regularly people talk about MVPs and business model canvases and all of that kind of thing. The gap for me though was looking at how do we start to get better at getting those customer insights when we're looking at a product or a service that doesn't exist. And I don't mean from we just haven't created it yet. I mean, we haven't quite gotten there in terms of maturity of technology, in terms of where we're at from a consumer trend and what's out there. We're not there yet, but we need to start to predict that, to know how to place our bets and what we need to be focusing on, and how we start to get that roadmap of how we get there. And what does that look like? How do you do that? Because it's not like you can say, you know, we're gonna work with people and develop a better vehicle. We know how to do that. Even if the vehicle is one we haven't designed yet, it exists today. And so people's mental model is there. But how do you start to have a predictable, a way that you are comfortable that you're going to get results that are really going to give you actionable insights that you can do something with and have confidence that what you're hearing from people will be how they'll act. It's what they're going to want. It's how they'll behave. It's what's going to drive changes in their behavior. And what we ended up doing to try to fill that gap was experiment differently with bringing those schools of thought together and using them in a very different way. And we've been doing a lot with co-creation, as you mentioned, in particular consumer co-creation, and using it in a way that you're doing very much a customer discovery type function. So not so much about a prototype and help me refine this and let's create something together that then in 6 months you're going to see it in the market. It's not that. It's that upfront, let's imagine together what could be possible in a very well crafted and designed, very specifically and designed engagement that lets us kind of draw out of them and slowly kind of breadcrumb them through getting to that future that doesn't exist. And it's so amazing to see this shift that happens, right? When they're talking about today and they're sharing with you today, and you get to this part where it's tomorrow and they open up and come up with all these ideas about how they're going to react in an autonomous vehicle, or how they're going to react in this environment where the vehicle does all these awesome things that it doesn't do today, and they go with it, and what they tell you and what they reveal is really incredible. And I think what we learned about that process was that crafting it, you really are bringing in things from all those different schools of thought. You really have to bring in, it's not just one thing, it's leveraging all these different diverse sets of backgrounds and experiences and kind of pulling all those things together in order to create the kind of experience that will allow customers to feel comfortable and to create with you around things that aren't there.
So I really do feel like we need a whole hour on just that topic. And we've been so lucky to work with you on it and pioneer this and just innovate innovation. But for today, I'll summarize that and we'll kind of move on to this other thing, because people all are talking about some new things. It used to be 5 years ago, everybody knew about open innovation. Everybody had scrums with regards to software. People started to do these design thinking sprints, and there was a lot with that, business model canvases, this blue ocean thinking, brainstorming and brain writing. What I think is really interesting is that now what we're seeing as a trend is people developing their own hybrids, because it sounds like everybody's held accountable. This isn't an activity for you. This is something, as we say, innovation you can take to the bank. You're trying to develop something that is where to play and how to win. And it's a very strategic output that's expected from your group. Is that right?
Yes, very much so. And the design principles, because that ended up being really what we delivered, insights, but design principles, the things that we could then hand over to app teams and vehicle software teams, depending on the study and what our focus was on, giving them a set of principles that they could leverage so that when they get to the point that they're ready to start to do that design work to create what that solution will be, they can leverage those insights that we learned and, be that much closer to delivering something that hopefully customers will really love, that will deliver a lot of value, that will give them the experience. because more and more it is all about overall experience. And so that was a big part of the insights, was what is that desired experience, and now how can we craft and create that for the future?
Great. So we have headlines now, just literally one quick statement. So if I could challenge you, one quick statement, one quick takeaway around something you're seeing in terms of how to stay ahead of these trends. We're very interested in, any insight in terms of what you see coming on the horizon really quick?
Well, I don't know about necessarily a specific trend, but I think that paying attention to this cross-section of futuring, and we're very fortunate to have a very talented futurist who we do pay close attention to what she says is coming. And that gives you those trends, but then also the technology trends. And to me, the magic happens when those things come together and you're creating things that are leveraging both. It's the future and it's the technology together.
Great. So let's move to the next slide. The next one is, by the way, in the Corporate Innovation Playbook, the customer, the strategy, and future trends. I mean, it sounds like it's all three. And it's interesting to see over time how this is changing. So let's go to the next slide. We have a couple more headlines. Successes and best practices. Is there a company that you just look at with interest or intrigue in terms of, gosh, I'd like to learn more about them. They seem to be doing it right.
I quote, it's funny because I quote Amazon a lot when I'm teaching people about innovation, only because I think they model very well this idea of getting out there, trying things, but also redoing the business model. And so I think part of that for me, why I'm going there, is that in our mobility space, it's the business model of these new transformational pieces that's really critical. I'm not thinking of a good example for one.
That's a great example. That's a great example. So let's do the last one, which is, we've talked about how well overall we think in terms of the industry practice, in terms of corporate innovation, people are for sure starting to redefine what innovation's expectations are. It's not just getting a bunch of ideas and having brainstorming and hackathons. It's really this expectation that you're going to deliver this growth for the company. So let's go to the last slide of the conversation. So I really liked what you said about linking it to the business model. And as I said, I've been really impressed with the work that we've done with you on this pioneering thing of an unknown future, an unknown customer need, and trying to get to the truth of that. Is there another model that you're looking for kind of what comes next with all that? I know you're going to another part of the world. Anything you want to share that isn't proprietary?
So we're doing a lot with co-creation right now, and doing it beyond just co-creating within our supplier ecosystem, co-creating with current products and services. What you're referencing is actually I'm going to China later this year. And so understanding that when you were a global player, getting those insights, those design principles that work for one study don't necessarily work around the world. And so we're also going to learn some things around when you're co-creating, and you have to do it in multiple languages, and you have to do it in different cultures. And what we found that we created was such a very specifically designed interaction. It may not translate to other cultures, and that's part of what we're going to be learning next, is how do we get better at that piece of it, so we can still get those same really powerful insights, but we're doing it in a way that makes the customer feel the most comfortable, and that helps us, again, feel confident in the results that we're getting out of the study.
Well, this was awesome, and I'm going to turn it back to Sean. Thanks for this segment. We're going to go on mute and let Sean continue to the next segment. Jamie, that was really powerful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thanks, Jamie. And it's funny, coming out of our survey, networks and building partnerships has become crucially important. In fact, it's not exposed in this presentation, but they evaluated each one of the different players within the innovation universe, and they gave the best passing grade to suppliers, channel partners as being the best innovation people in the whole system. So interesting that Ford's pursuing that strategy as well. And there is a poll question we'd love to serve up because we are going to get into technology here with my friend and colleague Paul. We've asked the question: which emerging technology trends stand to create the most transformative and inventive business models of the future? I have my predictions here. I'm sure Paul does as well, but we'll let this one simmer for about 5 minutes. I'll shut down this, but certainly go to the poll where you're at. Sometimes in this, it's tough to shut down the poll. I wanted to introduce Paul, though. Paul is an exponential technology business consultant. That is a very weighty title that he will live up to today. He has been around certainly the business and tech world for decades, and certainly as being one of the smartest people in my network, but also one of the few people that can actually talk business and talk technology and have both parties understand it. I thought it might be appropriate to have Paul on our call today. I know he's focused a lot on AI and how it impacts business decision-making in the future. And I'm not too sure where you are in the stages of completing your next book. Who's next? Are you done? Is it finished? Was it out? Like, I never know, because it's always the vagaries of a writer going, I just got to get that last 1% right. Are we done on it, Paul, or what?
Not quite done there. I'm off for 2 weeks in the country and the first 2 weeks of August to push it over the finish line.
Okay, good. All right, we're going to talk technology and innovation. You know, I think versus 10 years ago, we always have this 10-year kind of looking back in time framework. I think probably one of the biggest impacts on how we innovate is the technology of play, both in terms of the how we do it and maybe what comes out of the other end of the sausage grinder. What's your kind of overall take, Paul, in terms of how the industry of innovation has changed through the use of technology?
Well, I have a slide in one of my presentations. It was from a Gartner Group conference 6 years ago, their Classic Symposium conference. And they threw a slide up. They'd surveyed all the CEOs in the extended Gartner ecosystem. And the slide said the average CEO spends 2 hours a year thinking about technology and information technology specifically. And the best way to get fired or demoted or lose budget was to raise technology with the CEO. Fast forward to today, and the most valuable companies in the world, many of them those immense technology platforms, live and breathe technology every day, and certainly CEOs have figured that out and are following suit.
Wow. So, I mean, it's interesting how generations of leadership change. So, I mean, I think we're getting people in those roles now that are probably not learning on the job, but probably know what the technology is all about as they're in the job, right?
I just don't think it's acceptable to not understand where the disruption is coming and not kind of redefine your business. I thought it was really interesting hearing about Ford. Many of us, have lived and breathed this Kodak case over the life of our careers, where the company morphed from originally designing themselves as a company that enabled people to capture and share images, and they became a chemical film company, at the CEO level. And so I think to see Ford, redefining itself from an auto company generally to a company that provides transportation in a myriad of ways is a great example of a company that's, looking to what's the core thing we do and how can we leverage that going forward.
Agreed. And 1 second, Paul, because I do have something just to talk about the pace of technology as well. So never mind just the technology at play and how people use it, just how has technology changed the speed of our thinking, I guess, in terms of how we manage and how we lead innovation? I use a stat nowadays that I looked at a bunch of different metrics, and I can lay claim to the fact that we're about 7.7 times faster than we were a generation ago. And I think that's in large part to technology. So how do we plan it? How do we predict better? How do we actually just speed ourselves up? And what's our expectation going forward?
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right. I mean, exponential technologies have changed the world. We all, know about Moore's Law and the like, and we got all, see these lists of the 10 companies that didn't exist 10 years ago or 20 years ago that are trillion-dollar companies now. And it accelerates as we go forward. So I'm a big fan, as you know, of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And all of those technologies that you highlighted earlier are, I think, super important transformational long-term technologies. But the difference between some of those, blockchain and quantum computing and the like, which are a really big deal long-term, is artificial intelligence and machine learning is a really big deal in the short term. So one of my latest data points is the cost of a complex machine learning running the web computing machine learning applications for your standard complex application. 2 years ago, in 2016, that cost $250,000 US. Today, it's $12.75. So in the same way that computing power is virtually free today, machine learning is virtually free. And if you actually think about one of the potential areas of investment over the last 20 or 30 years that we haven't got the ROI that we hope for is those big corporate data sets. So many companies spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on big corporate data sets, data warehouses and the like, and maybe didn't get the ROI they thought. Yes, they got better at doing email marketing and the like, but really not that kind of transformational ROI. But with machine learning now, we're beginning to see that data put to good use and enable innovation and profitability.
It's interesting. I thought I'd expose, just for this level of discussion, just there's those three horizons of innovation, and doing something incrementally, expanding into a different product or market, and then truly doing something business model wise. All of those seem to be a shard of what they used to be in terms of length of time to get there. I know as a wet behind the ears Pepto-Bismol brand assistant, it took me at least 2.5 years to get anything out the door. Now apparently it looks like it's 5 months. Do the numbers here surprise you, Paul?
No, they don't surprise me at all. They're probably shortening. And if you think of the classic general purpose technologies, the big technologies that have changed the world over the last 1,000 years, from the printing press to electricity to the steam engine to the microprocessor, etc. Each time we move to the next general purpose technology, that innovation timeline shortens, sometimes by an order of magnitude, sometimes by 2 orders of magnitude. And so one of the reasons I think that the innovation models that you folks have been talking about are beginning to blur together is almost all of them are based on the reality of experimentation and getting in front of customers quickly. And in this world that changes so quickly, the getting in front of a customer and understanding how something can affect future product and service opportunities is super important.
I thought we'd even kind of bring the game up here, Paul. We've talked technology and just any kind of innovation, but I think technology is empowering almost a different way of running a business in the future, right? I think, if you look at any of the 4 big breaking technologies that I've identified here, and perhaps others that you have, it's almost not let's produce a new product or service or better experience. It's like, no, let's completely change the way we run a business. Thoughts on that in terms of the key technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it's so back to first principles, right? Like we have many traditional companies morph from the way they created value historically to thinking about the way they capture value today. I don't want to speak too much for the automotive industry because it's not my core area of expertise, but people need transportation. They needed to move from A to B, and we used to use horses, and then we moved to automobiles, right? And I think the important question is people don't think about the product. They don't, we talk about in academia, they talk about you're not buying the drill, you're buying the hole that the drill creates. And so especially young people today, they just want to get from A to B. And so the question becomes, how can you get them from A to B? Or they want to be healthy, or they want a greener environment, or they want to, have more time with their families, et cetera. How can technologies enable those outcomes?
We did ask about 40 different business models of the future, and we asked what was the most attractive ones people were putting their money and their resources behind. I would argue here, Paul, 5 to 6 of these top 6 business models people are banking on have a good portion of technology involved in their delivery. I'll let you process.
Yeah, well, they're almost all enabled by technology and enabled more cost effectively by technology. So, I mean, we're doing a call, this peer-to-peer sharing. Think about the complexity of running a webcast like this just a couple of years ago. We're able to use these technologies very simplistically and connect with people all around the world in relatively simple ways.
All right, we're gonna answer the poll questions that we had from earlier. I know you're huge into AI, so I don't know if you have like a pennant that you'll wave based on this, Paul, but by a slim margin, I guess it broke through over blockchain, which you're less bullish on, I think. But does this support your worldview? I presume it does.
Yeah, so it does support my worldview, and I wouldn't say I'm less bullish on blockchain. It's more about the timeline. So AI is an exponential technology, and blockchain not really. So you need to change the world. You need to change regulations, and regulators move more slowly than technologists do.
We're going to take the same approach Andrea had in the first segment. Just a quick headline. So you, more than anybody I know, have studied AI and its impact on business. What's the quick headline that a management decision maker needs to know about AI and how it'll affect how they innovate?
So I think if you look within your organization, any task that takes a human being, a second or two to do, you can automate with machine learning. If that is looking at a picture and identifying what it is, or looking at a word, or looking at a product coming off the end of an assembly line, identifying whether it's cracked, or looking at a health image, or listening to a word and comprehending it. Those tasks. So we're not really going to see the automation of jobs, but we are going to see the automation of tasks. And those instantaneous tasks, should my autonomous car stop when a cat runs across the street? Those kinds of questions. I think those will increasingly happen across all industries today. And yeah.
And then a quick headline on how corporate innovation compares to startups, and I guess the key difference. Like, is there one identifiable difference that you need to be mindful of?
Well, I think, so I would say yes and no, always the consultant answer. But I would say that, corporate, one of the attractions of machine learning for corporate innovation is when people talk about innovation, they like to talk about the sexy, futuristic type pieces, but corporations, it's really easy to sell taking cost out in a large organization. And so we need, those transformational future opportunities. How will transformation be done in the future? How will healthcare be delivered in the future? Those are important things. But it's really easy to sell some of these technologies, machine learning as an example, as ways to take cost out. And so it's possible to do experiments that very quickly deliver an ROI that then culturally enable senior management to step up and give you the resources that you need in order to dig into a larger scale opportunities.
And just a little tidbit from our study as well, supporting the reason why we want to spend this much time talking about technology and speed, because the biggest external challenges that innovators like Jaime have, she's probably going to nod her head at this, the speed of the marketplace, pace of technology, some legal and regulatory based on that, and then demanding customers. So and I think the customers are somewhat affected by the speed of technology and pace of the marketplace now too, right?
Yep.
Last one, quick sentence. Who's doing it best? Who's doing tech-based innovation best? And you're not allowed to say Google because everybody says Google.
Yeah, I'm going to say Google. I'm going to say it's bimodal. So I think innovation is being done best by those global giants because they have the resources, frankly. So the Amazons, the Googles, and and the Apples, etc. They have the resources to go bet. You know, Apple can bet on what kind of R&D is required for us to create automobiles, you know, or transportation in the future. So they have those resources to bet. But the other end is very specific use cases. So, you know, the $100 million, the $1 billion company that has deep domain expertise in a particular area, and then takes these new technologies and uses them to solve specific use cases and really drive actionable, you know, upside and revenue and profitability. It's harder in the middle.
All right. Play that fence line. Once again, go Raps in Game 6. But I'm going to move to Sharon now, because I think there's a completely different set to this innovation agenda. I saw Jaime almost is covering the umbrella of innovation, Paul covering tech and business models. There's the people side and the culture side and the leadership side of innovation. I think Sharon's certainly well seasoned to talk about that. She lives kind of at this intersection of that same space. She's both a branding and marketing veteran, but also very steeped in innovation. She's worked in open innovation enterprises over a number of years. And the last time I talked to Sharon, she was on her travel to Cameroon, I think, to make a Cameroon energy company more innovative. And so she's worked across a ton of different global geographies and a ton of different industries. So Sharon, welcome.
Thank you, Sean.
We're going to do the best 7 minutes of culture that this web has ever seen. All right.
All right, let's go.
Talk to me. Building an innovation culture. Yeah, I do so many of these webinars and webcasts, and although you start with one topic, eventually people go, you know what? It really does come down to the people and the culture and getting those things behind whatever you're trying to do. Same thing, the case here with innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, whether back in the olden days, whether we were implementing a large ERP
there's
system.
A little bit, hopefully, there's a little bit of a delay here.
Are you okay? Are you able to hear me? No?
I can hear fine.
I can hear you now, yep.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we did the test. So just looping back, you know, what all the factors are that require.
Keep going, Sharon.
So I think Sean is having a challenge hearing me.
Sean,
okay,
I'll just keep going. Sean, you can do the slides, and then when you stop freezing, we'll kind of keep going. So Sharon, tell us a little about the culture and how we know it's the most important thing, and it always gets down to that. But you've got some great rules of thumb and insights from your experience.
Yeah, when we focus on culture and we actually build, I've moved beyond the word culture into true community building. And what we found, whether we're building, you know, a global innovation community for an organization like Lego, or we're going down to Cameroon and really to try to help an organization turn around in terms of making sure everyone is participating in innovation. The one thing I've learned is investing in true community building. It is the thing that will not only kickstart your innovation, but it will actually sustain it over time. So you don't just get that bump of participation and new ideas coming out and then having it languish over time. So I think culture is really important, but I think community is what's superseding that now.
And Sean, do you want to jump in again, or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, if I can.
Sure,
I love our Canadian internet. It's a little bit behind the rest of the world, so apologies to all. I found this just an interesting tidbit from our study, Sharon, the fact that building an organization culture of innovation ranked #2 is something that as a process companies want to improve in the future. And I think we're going to talk commercialization too. I think implementing stuff in market is also deemed to be the biggest challenge. So surprises or no surprise there?
Well, no, and you know, just leaping ahead a little bit is you consider your supply chain and your customers as part of that community and part of that culture. That really does help with in-market. It helps with commercialization, because if they're involved from the get-go, you're building evangelists, you're doing, you know, market testing early, you're having that feedback loop being faster and faster so that you're optimizing for product market fit. And so it really fits this, absolutely.
And then I was encouraged by this. I didn't expect to see such a slanted result this way. in terms of your company's leadership. I think one of the things startups do well is acceptance of risk and pushing forward. Even Amazon has said, you know what, we'll operate under 70% of the information that we probably ideally would need. You know, our survey would say people are generally more on the risk-taking side of things than mitigation in terms of their innovation stuff. Encouraging, surprised?
Well, a little bit surprised in fact that I think we're still using the word risk, right? I think over time risk is going to sort of go away, and even the idea of failure is, I think, moving into the background, and we're really looking at really fast learning and experimental loops. So I think if you're open to learning that something doesn't work, or you're open to trying something that you've never done before and taking the results of that very rapidly back into your innovation process, I think maybe that's where we're at. I think when we call it, I think we used to call it risk because things did take longer and you did have to take more leaps of faith. But with this faster loop that we've got, we really can adjust things and make sure that we are getting more of that fit earlier on, and then adjusting as we go forward. So of course it does depend on your industry and the product and the timeline you have for that product life cycle. But certainly beyond the digital, I think we're finding that that ability to iterate and learn and experiment, I think, is really what we're doing.
Yeah, no, it's a good distinction, I think. And then another one was just focused on a marketplace or an audience versus focused on a new product or service. I'm not too sure because we don't have a snapshot from 3 or 4 years ago. My hope is that dial is moving toward the market and audience as a career marketer, but it seems like we're still slightly product and service centric in the way we innovate.
Yeah, and I mean, we hire lots of product people, right? And people whose jobs are to create those new products, and they tend to be, there are a lot of the people that we have in our organizations that are focused especially on technology-driven innovation. So I think it's often talked about that way, that it is product, but you know, the market is part of the product as we're going forward. So I think it's very encouraging that it's almost right in the middle there.
Now, I know my business partner, Andrea, and we always say, oh, my Lord, just don't give up, catch up. That's one of our trite phrases, I suppose. But I've been in those positions where it's like, oh, my Lord, my company is just so far behind it, like in bicycle terms. We're at the complete back of the peloton. How do we actually catch up? You know, what's our mindset? What are some of the interventions we can do? Any thoughts there in terms of that particular situation?
Well, I think what you don't do is pretend that your culture of your organization that is behind, you don't pretend that you're not who you are. I think you embrace perhaps the more conservative mindset or conservative approach that you've had and be really honest and say that's where we are. And so to look out beyond your walls in really measured and thoughtful ways about how might we, through partnerships, through acquisitions, through alliances, through collaborations, how might we do what we do best, which might be quality and standards and scaling and those types of things, but how might we actually pair and partner with others who are working differently so that the 1 + 1 = 3 approach tends to happen. What doesn't work is saying, you know, let's just start a little incubation center with some cool folks who are going to be able to work in that glass wall room,
and I think,
and they're going to innovate.
From an approach standpoint.
Go ahead, Sean.
So I might have to jump in again every time the Canadian internet goes.
Yeah, no, I've got a little bit of a delay on the audio, so we'll try to.
That's okay. We hear you now. I think that to Sharon's point, though, what's interesting is that if you are true to yourself, it's the best way to innovate, because then it's not like, I think about those Christmas sweaters where there's like a reindeer that they like put on with some stitching, like an applique, versus something that's really in the knitting of the sweater. And it sounds like, you know, if you know your knitting and you stick with your knitting and you do your innovation in an authentic way, you know, it's not going to fall off when you do the first wash. That was a terrible extended metaphor, but.
No, let's talk about speed, though. Everybody wants to be agile, right? You know, how do we get better at doing the components of innovation faster? And any thoughts there in terms of, you know, dragging people a little bit more quickly to the pace of their marketplace?
Now, one of the things I think we all share on the call is this portfolio approach to change, right? That change can happen in different sizes and also in different speeds and in different cost, models. And so one of the things that I do is when we go into an organization that wants to start to have really fast results is let's look at some of those either smaller things that are happening that can be maybe grouped together, or even look at hidden places where innovation has already happened but hasn't scaled throughout the organization. And those can actually be adjacent types of innovation. So going in and finding out who is already out there as a positive outlier, what projects may already be underway, and just nudging those forward. So, from a psychological perspective, or behavioral economists would say this, is let's get some traction going. So if you're doing that, I think it can be very helpful.
I'm back again. Oh, great. I'm not too sure if this slide was showing as I left, but this is probably one of the most interesting insights in terms of the speed at which innovation development is happening versus 5 years ago. There are nearly a third of the companies feel like they're going 200% faster than they were even 5 years ago. So I just found this one staggering. I don't know.
Yeah, and if I can just say one more thing on that, is that by doing what I talked about, what you're trying to do with the culture is building that confidence and even that muscle of what is it like to try things and do things more rapidly. So as you start with smaller things or find things that have already happened and build a team to start to scale those or work with those partnerships, you're starting to build muscle, confidence, reducing the barriers, the psychological barriers to experimentation. And so when you start to do that, you can then port it to larger products. And, we were talking about Amazon earlier. That's definitely something that is pervasive throughout Amazon, is this idea of experimentation and fast to market, trying things, right?
Agreed. We'll go quickly on these ones. We'll do the headline version again, just so we can get to questions and some little housekeeping that we'll wrap up toward the end. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different methods out there in terms of, your route to market in terms of innovation. There's probably big variances on size of company and culture of a company and industry. Is there one kind of golden rule we should consider here, Sharon, in terms of applying those methods to your particular situation?
Yeah, I would say.
And I'll share them on the next page. These were the top 5.
Yeah, for sure. I would say for sure it's about being fit for purpose, not applying one methodology to all types of projects that you're working on. So as an example, open innovation and working with lead customers may not be right for something that has a very long and specialized incubation period and is longer to market. And joint ventures and partnerships might be the right way to go unless there's something that it has a lot of intellectual property around it, and you may want to acquire something and bring them inside to work with you. So I would say that the number one rule is fit for purpose. Don't take one paint color and paint your whole company with it. And if you don't know which ones to apply, that's the point where you can bring people in who are experts in the various methods and again, run some experiments.
Or join webinars like this and learn from smart people like us and do it on the free, right, Sharon? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I do often see large corporations just sort of getting, fever about one particular approach, and they try to apply it to everything. I think we learned a lot from GE and their approach to lean, and some places where it worked and some places where it didn't. And, there was a big impact. I think we know what the impact was when they tried to embrace that across the whole organization on every project.
Any thoughts on who gets to lead innovation? In our study, there was a great variety of differences in terms of who the head of innovation was, whether it was a CEO or somebody else, which functional area, and how much depth of general business acumen versus specific skill they needed, and how much data versus creativity they were applying. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think once again, it's really heartening that we were almost in the middle, and I'm a big proponent of the leadership at the top of the organization that embraces, what Roger Martin would call this integrative thinking, or this opposable mind approach, where it's macro and micro, and it's fast and slow, and it's big and small, where it's technology and where it's industry domain. And so I think when we look at leadership at the top, that's certainly what we want. But it is odd that we tend to now be naming people responsible for innovation. And I think it's more of a flag waving exercise where we're saying, we are embracing this approach to change, and we want to be more nimble and agile, because truly innovation has to happen at every step. And when one of our organizations we work with, it's all grassroots. How do I get regular people to step up every day and look at problems in an innovative way, solve them, and then not hide them, but then really work to scale them to other parts of the organization? So leadership can have a capital L, it can also have a small l, and it often requires these seemingly divergent mindsets and skill sets to be able to do that. So yeah, I would definitely look at Roger Martin's approach. I think, you know, it's a bunch of years old now, but I think it still holds true.
Well, and it also supports Jamie's earlier point, I suppose, that, you know, everybody is now in charge of innovation, or at least has a stake in it, versus just, you know, the leader, the big L leader.
Plays a role in it, for sure. Like, if you're going to scale, you have to have people that are, you know, going to be integrating, putting standards together, systems, you know, we talked about challenges of commercialization. It's, you know, forgetting that you need people sort of in the back office or in the back room that are making sure that it is something that becomes standardized. Because if innovation is successful, it actually moves out of that top quadrant and moves into the way we do things around here. So everybody participates.
I think we're in our last 5 minutes, so I do think there's been questions, I think, on the chat. I'm going to accelerate right to the end. We're certainly going to give everybody one last question, though, in terms of what the future of innovation. So think about what the future of innovation is, Sharon. Obviously, this could certainly have its own hour topic in terms of just how do we commercialize and do innovation well, and we're doing the general highlights. But you know, I will eventually ask you guys what your biggest innovation predictions are for the future. I have some big ones myself. So just the 30 seconds of housekeeping we'll get through here. And we also have a poll question that people that are online can ask in terms of perhaps in a future webinar, we will completely boil the ocean on one of these different industries. So please answer the poll that's in front of you. And in terms of just future webinars, we've got one coming up on July 23rd called the 6 Continents of Innovation. We'll do North America, South America, and Africa at 8 a.m. And this is an early one for Andrea. It's 5 a.m. Pacific time. We'll do the other 3 geographies, and we'll also host one in August. If you do want to do the innovation survey, get a free copy of a report, please go to those 2 links, and by taking the survey, you'll get the free report. So, and you'll also get a chance to win some of these amazing books by some of our friends and colleagues. This is what we're doing. We've just minted 26 different leading edge keynotes that we've stumbled upon in terms of great innovation. I know Andrew's convinced me to do a not a book, and so we're working collaboratively together, and we'll be talking to everybody on that. And just to further invite people in, there's something called the Futureproofing 66, which will be bringing in 66 innovators over the course of the summer to work with us and collaborate with us. And I am going to get to the Q&As. I know there is a more piece. I think we've got 3 or 4 minutes, so I'm not too sure if anybody's been logging some of the questions, but Andrea, I'm going to...
Yeah, I've been logging the questions, but first I'd like to say goodbye to Jaime because she's got to run, and then Sharon's got to run. So everybody has to like race out, but I thought that it was really interesting, Jaime, to hear when we say in the wild, there's nothing more powerful than hearing all of this theory and how it really is playing out. So thanks to you, and anything final you'd like to say before you have to go grab your plane? She might have left, but so that was really awesome. And then same with Sharon. Sharon, any last things you want to say before you have to race out?
Just that for me, I think, you know, innovation it is a buzzword, as we know, and it means lots of things to lots of people. And I think it will be replaced with a new word in the next 5 years. I'm not sure what that is, but it will be part of the fiber of every organization.
Perfect. And you can go off the video. You've been awesome. And I really love this notion of fit for purpose. I'm going to remember that all day long. I think that was a great phrase to remember. And thank you, Sharon. I know she'll go off. I'll address a couple of questions that were in the chat. One of the questions was super interesting. And by the way, just to manage the expectation, we'll be going on with Q&A for maybe about 5 more minutes. And so we love this community that's building. We really thank everyone that was on the panel so far. We'll be doing Q&A in just a moment after this sort of informal soft stop. And I think that the takeaways for today were intended to be this idea of there's so many things out there, it used to be that keeping up with the Joneses, or this notion of risk, or something having to do with innovation as like as I was saying earlier, this applique sweater. But now it's so ingrained, and I think what Sharon just said is so true. By the way, we hope that everybody stops saying innovation and just says, hey, how are you going to future-proof your next? Just putting that out there. And so we're looking forward to building this community and learning as we did this morning. There are a couple of questions now, and I'd like to also thank Jocelyn and Joanne who helped the community conversation today as well. So there's one super interesting one about the ambidextrous strategy. And Nelson, I hope you don't mind if I call you out by name. Any tips to implement an ambidextrous strategy that fosters exploration and exploitation? So Sharon's left, but I would love, Paul, if you want to grab that one. How do you actually do this brilliant thing of being all things to all people and having talents that are big and small in future and today, and execution and exploration? How do you do that practically?
Well, we have organizations, and we have different people with kind of different responsibilities within the organization. So there's I talk about how do you create, deliver, and capture value. And so the front end of innovation is trying to find new and differentiated ways to create and deliver value. The back end of innovation is taking that new value you've created and figuring out how to capture it. And that changes over time. I'm doing a project right now for a large computer company, computer software company. It's going to be pretty obvious in a minute when I say. So they are largely they create a lot of value via search. They also are increasingly creating a lot of value via a voice interface. But they capture value via advertising today, and as they morph to a voice interface, their value capture criteria is going to change. And so, is there an opportunity in that kind of new area of smart speakers, et cetera, to figure out different ways to capture value that replaces the traditional revenue? So those are the macro challenges, but we've got lots of accountants. We've taught a generation of people how to make more money by taking cost out of firms. We know how to do that, globally, any sophisticated organization. So it's the front end, creating and delivering new value that is the one that's more the challenge for organizations.
So I'll say one last thing on that, and then there's another question I'd like to address from the audience, which is a really great Q&A, and feel free to keep putting them in the chat. So another thing that we talk about is that we talk about honoring all of the different dimensions of innovation. So it used to be that only people with a beret who came from Milan could be creative and innovative, right? And and we collectively at Futureproofing Next believe that sort of limits people. One of the most innovative solutions ever in the fintech world came from an insurance company, and the actuaries actually figured out the algorithm that was going to completely be game changing. So we also believe in embracing people's innovation talents for what they are, and figuring out ways to both have the big picture as well as the engagement with others, as well as research and logistics and all of the technology, and embrace it. Let everyone in the room at the right time, without having people from one school squelch the other people's ideas. Paul?
So, Andrea, I think that's a great comment. And I also say it brings home that your example brings home the reality of what we were talking about before. We all don't agree on what innovation means. So definitions change over time, right? And so the one of the hottest careers in the world right now is data scientist. And what is an actuary if not a data scientist? So we used to call them actuaries, but they're people who think in statistical analysis, and so insurance companies have lots of those core resources that are the potentially the key to future innovative success.
So I agree with that, and I'm just planting the seed in Sean's mind that we do something like Industry X of the future, and maybe take a lot of these industries and saying, in the future, it's like we were doing a project in finance of the future, and finance of the future is a lot of data visualization, right? It's less about keeping track of things and more about being able to offer the insights up to the organization. So that might be a great future one. I want to get to one more Q&A, which is from Anders. Hi, Anders. He's a good friend from Denmark. I'm hopefully going to see next week when I'm in Copenhagen. And the comment was working at an MBA program and how education is changing, and sort of the notion of even getting people to get on board with this stuff. If it's changing so fast, how can you have an MBA program or these trainings that are the traditional ways of looking at this? So we have definitely a point of view on that, but let's have Paul talk about it, since you're our honored and esteemed guest today.
Yeah, well, I would say, back to the core definition, right? Why does somebody go to an MBA program to learn? And there are a portfolio of ways to learn today. So I've been explaining AI to a lot of people today, but if you don't have the time to hire Paul and pull him in, there's probably one of the best courses I've ever seen is a 4-week course on the internet delivered by Andrew Ng for free, which is called AI for Everyone. Go take it. You're going to learn a lot about AI. So yeah, I think we have a challenge. We have in the academic world, we have people that, if you get a PhD in something and you're graduating today, most of the things that we talked about in this course from a technology perspective, be they, modern machine learning or blockchain or, some components of the Internet of Things and some components of VR, did not exist when you chose your career path. And so how can that high velocity world be integrated into a low velocity world of academia and still have the thinking that stands the test of time? So we don't want bubbles. We want to stand the test of time, but we also want to pick up the pace.
So I'll do the last thing, and then we'll end it. I'll send it over to Sean. So what prediction do you have? Something that isn't even on our radar today that you think is going to sneak up and blindside us?
This for me?
Yeah, like any industry, any trend. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, so I'm pragmatic. I'm an optimist in general about technology. I see some of the downsides, but I think if you step back and you look at the biggest problems we have in the world, I mean, if you talk to anybody who, for instance, has been in healthcare, they will tell you that man, it's a big, messy, challenging, a world out there, and these are difficult problems to solve. So but we have these big problems: healthcare, the environment, globalization, etc. And I think you're going to see some of these new technologies applied to problems that we thought were intractable, and I think you're going to see solutions there.
That's optimistic. We call ourselves rational optimists here at Futureproofing Next. So thanks for that. And thanks, Paul, for being part of this. And now, Sean, close us out. If he can. And if he can't, then I'll close us out. I'm so sorry that I sabotaged the Canadian internet so that the San Francisco team can win tonight.
Yeah, I'm trying to get this through as the audio breaks up on me. It feels like sands of time going through my hand.
Yeah, well, let me close this out, and maybe you can chat me if we need anything sidebarred. But today, I think one of the things that was intended was to whet everybody's appetite with regards to the Corporate Innovation Playbook, and we want you to be part of this community. I think it's great that everybody's talking about networks and community, because that's what we're building. We're really excited that next week we're premiering a workshop for the first time in Denmark. So we're doing the new Futureproofing Next workshop in Copenhagen, and the focus of it is global trends in fintech. And we're really excited to be sponsored. We'll have some more report backs from that and follow it on social media. And also, we really are excited about this community that we're building. And so look forward to the next webinar. We would love for you to ask us any questions. We'll send you the link in afterwards as usual. And 6 continents of innovation all in one morning. So be there or be square, July 23rd. Looking forward to it. And of course, the polling question, which is fantastic for us to see, is that we really hit a nerve with regards to education, learning, training. I think that this notion of, we call it perpetual refresh, and Sharon talked about, learn fast, and our notion of see, learn, decide, commit. It feels like learning fast is a very important superpower. So we'll make sure that we look at that maybe for the August one as well. So thanks to everybody. And Sean, can you speak now? Can we hear you?
I hope I can, but it comes and goes. So I apologize for any of the audio, but like a trusty right-hand person, you were able to pick up my baton. So just want to thank everybody. Thank Paul. Thank our other guests as well. Just I thought this was a really well-informed conversation, and certainly look forward to more in the future.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.